Hey guys, so we're gonna do another review for the New York Times article as a follow up to part one. I'm not gonna cover. There's so many articles here that I think we pretty much covered the main gist of the first one. It has some other lines like democracy is premised on the belief that we can trust ordinary people to make consequential decisions. Yes, that's why they initially, that's why we don't elect our Supreme Court justices directly. Republicans assault voting rights and the integrity. What fuels their advances is the rise of a gullible sector of the public ready to follow their leaders wherever they go. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing where what's often described as a weakness of the Dems, the existence of a variety of views and positions, freely debated or even fought over. I would say the Democratic Party is the opposite. I think the Democratic Party has even more minefields that you can walk over. And I can show that in my YouTube. I mean, like, what is... I mean, there's a lot of views that are unacceptable to have in the Democratic Party. And that's why the Democrats are losing, they lose minorities now because a lot of minorities are very religious and they're pro-life. And now, there's narratives in the Democratic Party. Like, if you're pro-life, you're anti-women, stuff like that. So if you're a pro-life old lady, like a pro-life old black lady, you don't know who to... It's challenging. And they are losing those kinds of voters, or at least not getting the turnout that they used to get. So... we'll just move on from that one to America's most urgent threat now comes from within. For many Americans, the events of January 6th brought the issue of domestic violent extremism to the fore. Through live-streamed images, they watched as attackers equipped with zip ties and bear spray wielded flagpoles and fire extinguishers, pushed through barricades, smashed windows, and called for the deaths of elected officials while gallivanting through the halls of Congress. Gallows were constructed outside. Pipe bombs were planted near the headquarters of the Democratic and Republican national committees. At least 7 people died. More catastrophic violence was narrowly averted. Until that day, violent attacks targeting powerful symbols of America were generally seen as a threat emanating from beyond the country's borders, like the September 11th attacks. Well, what makes the threat... moving ahead. What makes the threat especially pernicious is that it is not from the fringe, but from the mainstream. According to one study, a majority of the arrested Jan 6 attackers were employed. Thank you. Okay, yes. This is a good point, guys. This is a good point here. Like, even Ashley Babbitt was like a productive citizen who had a job and stuff. So it's like, this was different in the sense that it was like, not just a bunch of jobless people with nothing better to do. Like me. According to one study, some of them were teachers, chief executives, veterans, doctors, and lawyers. They had an average age of around 40. Yep. So it's easy to see why the U.S. government's traditional counterterrorism infrastructure is falling short. I don't understand where this is, guys. What the counterterrorism structure of the United States has been going after the far right since the days of Ruby Ridge and a little bit before that. But since the days of Ruby Ridge, the United States federal government has gone hard. The FBI and ATF have gone hard after right-wing domestic terrorists. Always. Always. Bill Barr was Donald Trump's attorney general. You think he likes right-wing extremists? You think he likes Timothy McVeigh types? Huh? Counterterrorism was about Muslims in 2001 and after, but before that it was about the far right, and they dealt with those people. How many more Timothy McVeighs have there been, huh? 0. You think they didn't deal with those people? They dealt with them in pretty illegal ways. I mean, Ruby Ridge, the guy got acquitted because it was illegal. They've been going after the far right for so long. It makes me mad that it's like this itself is historical revisionism. It's unfactual to say the U.S. government has to stop treating rising political violence and domestic extremism solely as a security problem. Otherwise, we'll be left with a major blind spots in our strategies to combat violent extremism. I mean, okay, yeah, so the FBI and ATF can't do anything against those people, but if they were dangerous, they would be able to. So it's like, it only matters if it's a security problem. Except for when they start stealing the votes. But that's like, what do you want the government to do about that? Like the top-down government. That means that as soon as Republicans are in charge, they're allowed to do whatever they want. So you want the government to try to control people's minds almost. Like the mind of a doctor or a lawyer who was there on Jan 6. So the rest of this argument, the rest of this article that they go into is talking about solutions, which are good. This means that the federal, state, and local government should invest in and promote digital and media literacy programs. Yes. Civic education, sure, and other efforts to strengthen democratic norms and values. Why do we want democratic? I mean, I'm not all that. I mean, when I think democracy, I think of Socrates. 51-49 executed. 51% executed. Like, I don't like that. I don't like the mob. It's like, oh, I got more votes. Okay, whatever. Anyone can get more. Anyone can get a lot. What matters is are you principled? Do you understand the government and your role? Are you going to have sense of duty? And that's the kind of stuff that you use a republic where you have middlemen. Like, that's why our justices, our judges are still good, because there's a middleman. They have to have some kind of qualification. You can't just get elected by a mob, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. No one wants the federal government to police people's beliefs. What? That reminds me of no one wants to take the guns. No, there's a lot of people who want the federal government to police people's beliefs. Because even this one's followed up by a but. But the U.S. government's focus on using conventional counterterrorism tools fails to account for the generally unchecked spread of disinformation and conspiracy theories. Yeah, well, are they violent? Not violent. Are they dangerous? Propaganda targeting racial and religious minorities, and the increasing dehumanization of those with whom one disagrees. These are important precursors to violence. Yes, they are, but man, I mean, I think this is what would January 6th... I'll end this article. This article is about to end, and I think that it's gotten its main point across. So we'll end it with this paragraph, guys. What would January 6th have looked like if policymakers focused on these precursors? Many of the Americans who stormed the Capitol last year were fully immersed in a universe of disinformation that convinced them that they were heroes acting to save democracy. Now, I'll answer that first question. What would January 6th have looked like if policymakers focused on these precursors? Exactly the same. I don't think it's top down. I think it's grassroots. It happens on places like Parler. And are you going to make Parler and the Donald.win? It's already been happening, guys, through the corporations. Like Reddit banning the Donald subreddit. Twitter banning Trump. Like Facebook is one of the ones that doesn't care because of Mark Zuckerberg's like ideology. But you still have plenty of censorship of disinformation. Plenty of it. And what does it look like? Exactly the same. Because that's not what drives people. That's not what drives people to believe in disinformation. Emotions do. You're not going to change people's emotions. Just like when a white cop shoots a black guy, there's emotions involved there. So there's always going to be a swift reaction that's resolved at trial. Sometimes the white cop's guilty, sometimes the white cop isn't. But they're always going to get attacked because of emotions. The policymakers are just riding the wave, people. They're just riding the wave. That's it. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, they're just riding the wave. They're not the ones who started it. They're not smart enough to do that. They're not puppet masters, I'll tell you that. They're often afraid of their own followers. They ran away from their own people. What a bunch of losers. So, there's just all kinds of annoying assumptions. Like, who says people follow policy leaders? It's their emotions. They don't like the globalist Democrats, so it sucks ass when they win. I don't know. So I guess my main point is that it's not as top down as a lot of these articles make it seem, where there's something we can do. It's like I said in my last podcast episode that I did upload to the YouTube channel, where oh man, I lost my spot. Geez, sometimes I can lose exactly what I'm talking about because my mind skips ahead. See, when I'm thinking really fast, my mind skips ahead to ahead before I get the words out. So but the main assumption that it's so top down, and that if you just it's exactly like what I said, where I was saying every time there's a problem, the Democrats automatically default to the government doing something. The government must have some kind of solution through some kind of regulation. What do you know? A perfect example. What if it's average people that have to do something? What if democracy means grassroots? You have to go talk to the actual Trumpers and figure out why they're getting so cuckoo. They're getting cuckoo because they're getting, a lot of reasons. I can talk about it. But it's about emotions. You're never going to change their emotions if you just ignore them. It's like trying to do that to BLM. It'll never happen. And a lot of their emotions are founded in genuine, issues. It looks kind of like rural America is struggling in a lot of ways, just with opiates and other things like that. Not as bad as the cities, actually, but they are still kind of struggling, and they're poor, and they're this and that. So there's a lot of emotions directed at the cities and at the Democrats. How are you going to change that? It's just like how there's a lot of emotions directed at Donald Trump. How are you going to change that? You're not. But I do worry when the policymakers support it. That's why I said the scariest thing about January 6th for me is Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. That's the scariest. It should have been 100-0, and then it should have been 100-0 for impeachment in the Senate. Specifically the Senate. That's the most worrisome thing, because the Senate is supposed to stop all that stuff. That's what the Senate does. They put a damper on the mob. So Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz becoming like mob senators, mob mentality senators, like House Rep senators. That's what scares me, okay? But besides that, it's just politics and emotions. The mob is always going to be emotional. It's fine. It used to be like that, and this country survived. So yeah. Thanks, everybody. The main problem is that it's just the way that they construe things, have certain assumptions. And they ask the questions that are supposed to be rhetorical. What would it have looked like if policymakers had a different stance? It's like a rhetorical question. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't think it would have looked different at all. How many Democrat officials supported Bernie and his claim that Hillary stole it from him? Not that many, and yet there's a lot of Democratic primary voters who aren't really all that partisan. They just liked Bernie. But they like Bernie more than they like the DNC, or they like Trump more than they like the RNC. And it can lead them to do things if their candidate encourages them to. emotionally, based on emotion, not facts. Of course. The fact that people, it's like, so you're going to say that it's only the right that's based on emotions over facts? Please. The whole facts have a liberal bias thing is just not true. Like, obviously, you can point to January 6th and say, like, oh, well, but you can also do that to the left. You can point, once again, 2016. Hillary stole it from Bernie. It's like, okay, you know? Like, Bernie people support caucuses over direct, you know, like, they like caucuses because Bernie wins those. Well, those are pretty anti-democratic, you know? You want it to be elected in a caucus like Nevada and Iowa so that Bernie can win with less votes. Well, wow. Well, it's not fair. Bernie has less money. Yeah, I know. Well, it's not fair. Bernie's a pariah, whereas Hillary's the insider. It's just not fair. Yeah, I know. It sounds similar. The only difference is that, you know, I mean, is what the candidate told them to do, in my opinion. So yeah. Anyways, guys. It's a lot about emotions and human psychology, and Democrats spend all their time. This is all a waste of time. This article means nothing and is a waste of time. Because they're trying to make sense of emotions, and that doesn't work. America's most urgent threat. It's not an urgent threat if it's existed for a very, 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 very long time. Since the very beginning, this kind of stuff's been happening. And it used to be worse. It used to be way worse. You think January 6th is bad? Look at some of the crises of the old country. We're just stepping out of the era where everything's really sterilized and logical. Because we're realizing that that was like a false god. Logic. Because it's not true to our emotions. So we're throwing it out the window again and going with passion. And that's why people need to realize. That's why our government was designed to isolate the passion to the House of Representatives. They get everything rolling, and then the Senate has veto power, and so does the president. You know, so you, just like judges, like you have judges able to veto laws, but they can't pass them. You have the House is the most responsive to the people. But you can't have everything responsive to the people because of this. But that's not the urgent threat. They're not a threat. They're just people. They're doctors and lawyers and stuff. You feel threatened by them? I didn't. They would have killed their own followers. They would have killed Mike Pence. They would have hung Mike Pence. That would have been like almost just like, wow, they got their own guy. Jesus, how is a mob that gets their own guy and attacks their own side? Like, to me, that's like, okay, well, if they had been going after only Democrats, then yeah, that's scary. But they were going to hang their own guy. That was never going to work. They're not a threat. They're not a threat. What's the threat is taking away voting rights. And that's what we have the judges for. We just need to get strong judges and stuff. I know that I'm kind of contradicting myself. It's like, well, you said it's not urgent, but then they're going for voting rights. And what I'm saying is that it's not because of the grassroots people. It's because the grassroots... It's not because of the grassroots mob emotion, because that's always going to be there and it always has to be moderated. But it's not policymakers as such who moderate it. I think that a lot of it's the structure, like superdelegates and stuff like that. The parties used to have a lot more control over their candidates. And that's not counterterrorism, that's just elitism. You're basically saying that average people are too gullible and they can be turned into terrorists too easily. So we need more of a technocracy and we need more of an information sphere control. And that's just not something that you need to prove to me that it's that's in any way workable. Before you start saying that it would have worked. And oh, how different would it have looked if we blah blah blah. If you what? You know, they're not really being all that specific. So I'll close it out with that, guys. I might just upload this standalone first because it kind of stands on its own. But the first episode, we just went over a bunch of, we just went over another article, but it was a little bit more ranty. All right, cool. Thank you, everybody.